Oh, as Odell, Abner, Dracula.
And how did you arrive at that name, too? I'm curious. I mean, I figured Del Dracula from the comic, from the, what is it, the 60s, I think it was? Is that related, or how did that come about?
Yeah. Well, I used to, this is a long story short, I used to work as this is already too long a story. I was a comic buyer for a chain of newsstands in the Twin Cities. It was a pretty unique opportunity. And when I didn't go out, to different stores or to somebody's house, somebody's, mini storage to buy their collections, we had guys in the stores who were authorized to do smaller buys. And I would still have to, in the warehouse, I would kind of sort through these different buys that they would send me. And I'm not a comic book genius, and I've not read every comic there is out there, but I feel like I've at least heard about or, been around most of the different stuff that's out there. And one day I was processing a buy, and there was a Del Dracula comic in there, and it just floored me because I had no idea. I mean, I knew that they did like the Universal Monsters #1, like a special. Dell published an adaptation of Dracula, but I had no idea that there was a superhero Dracula. And so I sat down in the office and I started reading this thing, and it's just bonkers. It's like this guy, he's a descendant from the historical Dracula, and he's sick of everybody thinking that his family is all mixed up with sorcery and the occult. So he becomes a scientist. That's great. But then as a scientist, he starts to mess around with bats. Still maybe fine, but if you're trying to get away from all that baggage, why are you going to mess around with all these bats? And I don't even know how they present it in the book, but he basically squeezes this juice out of their bat brains that the bat has got to die from this, and then he drinks it, and poof, he has these quote-unquote science-based powers of radar and, I don't know, maybe some kind of agility, bat agility, and I just was floored. I couldn't believe someone thought of this. I couldn't believe somebody published it. I couldn't believe it was ostensibly the #2 issue after this other Dracula #1 that was the Universal Dracula. I was amazed and astounded. And so I started to build my own, because there's only 3 issues of it. There's issue 2, 3, and 4. And then for some reason, there's no #5. #6 is a reprint of 2. #7 is a reprint of 3. And #8 is a reprint of 4. I think that's right. It's a lot of math. But anyway, it's crazy. And so I just started to, I really spent a lot of time with that character in my head. Like, what? Who thought this up? And what would his other stories be? And I started to, think like, oh, maybe his name is, Odell, because then now you tie in the word Del. And I think that some kind of like, in like a linguistic way, the word Odell has something to do with the word purple somehow. I can't remember why I chose that, but there was a couple reasons, and I made it all make sense in my head. And then
probably forgot.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah. That's how meaningful it was. But anyway, I just started using it online because, everybody should have better stuff to do than be who they really are online.
Indeed. Well, is there anything that we've talked about that you would have a problem with showing up on a podcast? Like in particular, when you're talking about being a buyer, do you want me to cut any of that stuff out so that it's not like too much personal information or anything?
I think it's probably fine. I mean, nobody's going to, probably 2 or 3 people that I know in real life, I know on the internet, I think there's anybody who's going to, put 2 and 2 together and go, aha, maybe. But if they do, so what?
Okay.
But it was, I'm at the crossroads with this and with V for Vendetta, talking about the communion thing. I've got a 16-year-old son, and I'm like, he went into his room when he was 10-year-old and started playing Minecraft, and now he's 16, and I think I missed my V for Vendetta window with him. Like, am I too late to the game, or is he? And then I'm like, oh my God, is he even gonna care if he's 16 and he thinks Dad is boring and stupid? Even if Dad tries to give you V for Vendetta, do you go, that's boring and stupid? I don't know. It's tricky waters I got to navigate.
He tosses through and he's like, is this some kind of anonymous thing?
That's what I'm like, it's, what that is, right? He's like, yeah, the guys from Anonymous use it. Yeah. Well, it was a comic before it was a movie, so you don't have to associate it with them. But
ruiners.
Ruin. I mean, that's a different kind of ruiners. I stopped after, what was it? It was X2. Like, I'm done with anything that has ever been a comic book that I like and gets turned to a movie. I'm not going to see it because I can't stand them missing the point so bad, number one. And number two, even even though I didn't cherish it, Hugh Jackman Wolverine is in my head now.
Mm-hmm.
And now when I read a Wolverine comic, I hear his voice and I'm like, So I'm sure as hell not going to ever see the Watchmen movie. I'm not going to see anything. And people get, I was working in it was after my fancy comic shop gig, and I was just a comic shop manager at a different store in town. And when Watchmen came out, and they were like offended, like I was a heretic of some kind. Like, I'm not going to see that movie. It would be like me telling the 13-year-old version of me, don't buy that Spencer's mug. That's not a good idea. You go, what? Sacrilege. How could you? It's a movie of the thing you like. It's a coffee cup of Spider-Man. You have to support it. But I was out until Iron Man, and I started to pick and choose, but accept that it could be done. Like, they could make a superhero movie that wouldn't make me want to punch the screen.
Well, I always found something to like about all the terrible movies. There's always something in there where it's like, yeah, I like that thing. They did that thing from the comics where they did this whole new thing. But yeah, that's one of the things that's weird about having superhero and comic book content so dominate the pop culture landscape is there's just so much stuff I've had to let go of. It's like, just isn't mine anymore. This belongs to everybody now. And some of this stuff belongs to them way more than it belongs to me. So I can't act like I'm the gatekeeper. I'm the arbiter of what's correct and what isn't correct with this stuff. Up to a point, obviously. There's some things where it's like, no, that like with a religious zeal, it's like, no, I grew up with this cap. This is my cap thing. How dare you take my cap thing? But there are things that I think that you have to hold on to, and then there are things you have to let go of, and figuring, I guess that's part of the journey, is figuring out, okay, which is which, which is the thing that's just like, you've screwed up, you've ruined it, and what is it where it's like, maybe I'm just an old man shouting at the clouds and I need to move past my little hang-ups on this. But also what's great about getting older and having so much of this stuff is I have the right and the privilege to actually just not invest anymore. I can just pick and choose because there's so much. It's not like my political party is going to lose if I don't show up and vote. It's like we've already won,
Right.
So it's like, okay, so I don't have to watch, like, especially, in the old days when you literally just had like Superman, Batman, a few other guys, and you feel like you had to go see The Shadow, or you're failing the team, It's like, it's great to have that burden lifted and actually have like big name, like, I still haven't seen Wakanda Forever. I'm probably going to have to because they want to do a recording on it and they're going to be ticked off if I'm not able to bring my own opinions. But I was going to be perfectly happy to wait for that thing to stream. I'm really happy that I still haven't seen Love and Thunder because I don't have to, and there's nobody who can compel me to do it, and I'm not compelling myself to do it anymore. I don't want to see it. I'm not going to see it anytime soon. Now, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, despite the fact that I'm sure they're going to screw up Warlock, there's still enough in that trailer where it's like, okay, I'm going to have to go see that in the theater. I can't refuse that. They're in the costumes, dude. Lila's there, It's like, I got to see Lila and Rocket get together again. She looks just like the Mignola comics. How could I refuse that? I got to see that. So, to pull a page from Fire and Water, you got to find your joy.
Yeah, it's I was complaining about in Marvel in general. It seems like they can kind of hone in on, if not what made the characters successful for so many years in the comics, of at least a facet or some dimension of that, right? With like Iron Man and Captain America. The reason those blew my mind so bad is because it seems like it was Iron Man and Captain America up there, right? It's those characters. And the thing, I love the Guardians of the Galaxy movies, and it's not a popular opinion, but I think the second one is a contender for my favorite Marvel movie.
Mm-hmm. If you listen to us talk about that, we are big boosters of Volume 2. I have not a ton of interest in Volume 1. I haven't revisited it in full since theatrical. And I haven't gone back to 2 either, but I know I'm going to, and I know it's going to be meaningful for me. That movie just speaks to me in a way that most of the Marvel movies don't. The whole thing's about absentee fathers, and it's like, okay, well, all of my closest friends can speak from that experience. So, it's just going to hit different for us.
Yeah, and that's a big part of it. I mean, that's the whole part of it. And James Gunn is, he's great, but the thing that he didn't do with Guardians was he didn't find out why Star-Lord was popular or successful or admired. I mean, maybe because he wasn't popular or successful or admired, but he basically reinvented all those guys. Drax, I don't need to tell you, he's all those guys are totally different. Mm-hmm. And I was lamenting, the Warlock. Like, I know Warlock is going to be in this. I know it's going to be part of that other gold people planet. I know it's going to have nothing to do with anything. I know it's going to, it's the biggest hurdle for me so far with this Marvel stuff. And my friend who used to work in the comic shop, he's like, what's your problem? I said, they always make these changes in the movies, and then they change the comics to reflect these changes. And it's just, I don't want to have to deal with that with Warlock. I mean, the Rocket Raccoon thing ended up okay. Al Ewing was writing that, and it ended up okay. And I don't feel like, I'm not one of these, like, they ruined my childhood, but I'm afraid of what they're going to do to Adam Warlock. And he said, what fantastic, untold Adam Warlock story do you think is out there that this is going to thwart? And I said, oh, you're saying there are no fantastic, untold Adam Warlock stories out there because people are not dwelling on or living with Adam Warlock like me. He said, yeah, that's what I mean. You might get some new ones out of it. The old ones you still have, so deal with it.
Well, and, that's the problem I had when they brought him back in the 90s, is I thought that that's what I wanted until it happened. And I realized that everything that was interesting about Adam Warlock was in his being a character of finite existence and tormented existence. And when you bring him back and you try to make him seemingly, like a fairly normal cosmic type guy, he's a snooze. And tons of people have tried to do interesting things with him for 30 years now. Have any of them succeeded? Not really. That's one of those characters that I'll actually dip back into Marvel after, swearing him off to a large degree in the early 90s. And so I've dipped in, I've checked it out, and for the most part, the really great Warlock story was already told.
That's true.
The one thing I will say too about the little snippet we see of him in the trailer is that he seems to be an adversarial presence. And I do think that Adam Warlock as an anti-hero or outright villain from the perspective of the Guardians of the Galaxy, that's a lot more palatable to me than them trying to just make him another guy. He's the gold Silver Surfer or whatever. Right. I have no use for that. I'd much rather them give me an ego style twist than to just try to, prop up the next franchise. Oh, we're going to spin Warlock out of this. And, we're going to get some middling person to do that trilogy. It's like, if he's punching on Gamora, at least there's a shot at this guy being interesting. I don't think he's going to be my guy. I don't think he's going to reflect the comics that I want reflected. But I don't see Marvel ever doing that stuff. Because though they're happy to do like the somewhat degenerate, dysfunctional family stuff with the Guardians, but I don't see them again doing something like the Universal Church of Truth or anything. I don't see them allowing one of their lead characters to commit suicide, temporal suicide, and be a schizophrenic, depressive, multiple personality disorder sufferer. Right. So it's like, okay, if they're not going to go there with it, then I guess the best I can hope for is him to be an adversarial presence that maybe takes some shot at the concept of a messiah, since that the whole point of him is that he's not the messiah, but he's perceived to be and created to be, and he utterly fails at that regard. That's something they could kind of touch on, at least, so I'm not, that's the one element I'm not particularly hot for, but dude, they have Space Hog in the trailer, I'm in.
Yeah. Did you ever read the Greg Pak Warlock?
We did a podcast on it, actually.
Oh, you did?
That's one of the earliest episodes of the Marvel Superheroes podcast was that. It's so weird to me in retrospect because, again, we went into podcasting not really understanding what we were going to be and what we were going to do. And I had different things in mind that I thought we were going to do that never ended up happening. Never would I have thought that the one episode that we ever did devoted to Adam Warlock would be the Greg Pak miniseries.
Oh, that's crazy. I'm going to have to go look it up.
Yeah, that's like episode 3, I think, 3 or 4. It's rough. I'll tell you, it's rough. But we did, it was an interesting miniseries. We did have a decent conversation about it.
Yeah, I can't remember. It was one of those things where I was emotionally just like, I hate this when it came out. I can't stand that this is Jim Starlin's not doing it, and that means I hate it. And then it was canceled, and then I think I read it out of the quarter bin or something like that, and I was like, oh man, was I wrong? I made a mistake. And I don't remember why now, but I remember thinking like having to go around and tell everybody, I made a mistake. I was wrong, which is not the easiest thing to do in a comic store. Sure. Those guys, oh my gosh, you got to nail it the first time or they hate you forever. But
yeah, it was a similar situation for me where I didn't think it would be something I would be interested in. And then I went at one of the local shops, Bedrock City, and they'd done these little packs. They were like quasi trades, which is something I'd done back in the 90s. So I picked it up because I figured, especially, I don't remember if I picked it up before or after we'd started podcasting, but I definitely was interested in checking it out. And then having read through it, I realized, okay, so this is a revisionist take on the original concept of the character from Fantastic Four. This is them doing him. And then by the end of it, they kind of let you know that they haven't screwed up anything. They haven't messed with the continuity. This isn't Ultimate Warlock or anything.
Right.
And so it, like you said, it worked for me, but but it's also interesting because it's still not Adam Warlock. It's still not the Starlin stuff. Everything, if you're not doing Starlin, you're not doing Warlock, because that's how I'm programmed. So there's a certain distance, because it's like, oh, this is him. They're not messing with the Starlin stuff. This is him. This is a different thing. This is the thing that was the prototype for what Starlin did. So that disassociation made it easier for me to enjoy it. But I also got really married to the idea of Adam Warlock being betrayed by an Indian actor, and that sure didn't happen.
Man, I've got the trade of that Warlock stuff in my not my to read, but my readable, not like the stuff I don't care if it gets left in the bathroom or coffee spilled on it or something. I should go fish that out. That stuff, all that stuff is fantastic.
Now, are you talking about the Starlin stuff?
Yeah, the Starlin stuff. The big.
What was nice about that one is a good chunk of that got reprinted in Fantasy Masterpieces. You can still find those pretty cheap. The main problem is they have very high print runs, so you can get them for nothing, but it's harder and harder to find them. Those used to be pretty prevalent in the quarter bins, and now not so much. But also you can find, they did that somewhat misguided reprint series in the 90s where they'd already done the Baxter format one in the 80s, and they reprinted it just a few years later, and those you can find pretty cheap too. So if you're just looking for bathroom readers, that's a good way to go to have that material.
I might have, because that was I didn't always understand when I was getting into it. I didn't understand I was buying reprints when that came out, because that was all like on the heels of Infinity Gauntlet, I think, where they were like, this is working again, let's put these back. That, and I couldn't always tell, because I think did they have new covers?
Yeah, and that's one of the things that kills me. That's what I actually didn't buy those, because I already had them like twice over. I'd had several of the original issues from the 70s, and I had some of the Fantasy Masterpieces, and I had the Baxter reprints. So then the fourth dip was a little much for me, especially in the early 90s when I had so many other things to buy. But it didn't help that the Baxter editions had the great wraparound covers when Starlin was still in his prime. And then by the time he does the new covers in the 90s, they're single page, and it's Starlin after he's let his artistic abilities atrophy, because he had stopped drawing regularly around 86 or 87, I think it was. And so you could see that he never quite recovered the ground that he lost when he just wasn't drawing routinely anymore.
Yeah.
And so it's like, wow, these are clearly inferior covers. He's obviously not bringing any new insights into this imagery, so they're more stock type of images, and they're not as expansive, and they're on worse paper. It's like there just was too many strikes. But again, if you're pulling them out of a quarter bin, that's a whole different scenario.
Yeah, it's a whole different. The stakes are a lot lower.
Mm-hmm.
He's the guy. Starlin would be cool if Kevin Nolan inked him. I mean, everybody would be cool if Kevin Nolan inked him, but that'd be something I would like to see.
That would have been interesting. That would have been almost like when Klaus Janson was inking Gil Kane. So transformative. And one thing, honestly, I love Jim Starlin. Not great at drawing women, and Kevin Nolan could definitely help him with that.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be one of those things where you could say this is for sure Kevin Nolan's heavy hand, but no one would complain, I don't think. Yeah, that would be cool.
Yeah, and I think it was it Moon Knight or something? I was looking through a bunch of Rampaging Hulks, and then there was one random Man-Thing story that Jim Starlin drew that was all about a trinity of women, and it's like, you could not have picked a worse guy to draw this damn thing. All these women, like the little girl looks matronly. It's like, what are you doing, man?
Did he write it too?
No, I think it might have been a Mantlo, actually.
Oh.
Yeah. Which is another weird combination, because Mantlo's weirdness is a different weirdness than Starlin's weirdness,
Yeah, it is. That's for sure.
Yeah.
When I found out, I had read his stuff before Rocket Raccoon, but when I found out, like, that was where I looked to see, like, hey, who wrote this? And I was like, oh my gosh. And then you find him in the Hulk and Spectacular Spider-Man, and oh man, that guy, I think he's pretty underrated. I really like him a lot.
Mantlo had some problems because there were accusations of like plagiarism and stuff, and so that there's an issue there. But it's just like, I'm a big defender of Stan Lee, because there's plenty of things you can accuse him of. There's plenty of wrongs that he committed. If you want to be Team Steve, you want to be Team Jack, I totally get that. But at the same time, nobody wrote like Stan Lee, and he wrote in his very distinctive style across a whole bunch of different artists. So how is it that all those artists were all writing the same kinds of stories? But they weren't, because you had a guy who was doing dialogue. There was also that same month dialoguing a Western and a teen comedy and a soap opera. And he had a skill set that nobody else, I think, in writing has. Nobody ever had to write an entire line of books by themselves, and to do it while collaborating with artists that were probably doing the plots, but he still had to pull it together. And these guys weren't necessarily able to articulate everything they intended to do, and what they intended to do may not have necessarily been what was commercially viable of interest to Stan. So he did a lot of messed up stuff, but that doesn't mean that he wasn't one of the most exceptional comic book writers of all time, regardless of the plot. You know, it gets back to like the story we just read. Again, the bare bones may be Tales of the White Freighter, but what you do with it, the spin you put on it, is kind of a different beast.
Right.
So it's the same thing with Bill Mantlo. It's like I still haven't gotten around to reading it, but I went ahead and I bought Monster, the Monsters, the Barry Windsor Smith book from Fantasy.
Oh, yeah.
Where he finally tells a tale that he said that Mantlo ripped off from him and told in the Hulk. But the problem is there's been 35 years of Hulk stories built upon that material, and there's no strong indication that Barry Smith would have ever finished that in a timely fashion. You know, it might have come out, 20 years ago instead of 35 years, waiting 35 years, but the impact wouldn't necessarily have been there. And also, frankly, Bill Mantlo's a better storyteller than Barry Windsor Smith. I love his artwork. It's a fantastic artwork, and I know that he takes great liberties while he's doing a story that's been provided by somebody else, and a lot of times the writer has to be able to kind of go with that. But whenever I've read Barry Smith actually writing his own stuff, he's just not at the level of a good writer. He's passable. He's fine. Barry Windsor Smith's storyteller was okay, and I'll read this and hopefully it'll be good, but I really don't think it's going to be as good as what Mantlo and the people who built upon what Mantlo did with the Hulk. I mean, the movies are based on what Mantlo did. So whether or not the germ of the idea came from Barry Smith, the ultimate again, getting out of religious themes, depending on who you talk to, it matters what you think, or what you consider, or what fantasies you have, or what, impulses you deny yourself, but most people will agree that it's a different level when you do a thing versus when you think about a thing or feel, what I'm talking about. There may be a sin in the thought, there may be lust in the heart, whatever you want to call it, but really the thing we're most concerned about in this world is what you do materially, what actually exists and impacts upon other people. So it's great to have this pristine idea of what Barry Smith would have done for the Hulk if he'd finished the damn thing and gotten it published, but Bill Mantlo is the one who did. And I know what he did, and I know the impact that it had, and it altered the character of the Hulk going forward, and I think that stuff's going to be remembered long after everybody's forgotten about the Barry Smith stuff, regardless of his idea. You didn't get it out there, did you?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I'm actually looking at it across through right now. I think I'm missing an issue or two, but I have the oversized slipcase for those storyteller, and I love them. And so he's, Barry Windsor Smith is fantastic, but there is a huge piece of, who did it, like who actually, like I had an idea for this, but then somebody else did it. They're the one who did it. And I think that's why more than once, this is me going all the way to the edge of my philosophy and holding the line, where I end up defending Rob Liefeld a lot because no matter how bad he draws feet, or how many did he rip off George Perez when he did X-Force #1, or his Shaft supposed to be Arsenal, those comics got published. He drew them not on time, I concede, not always to my taste, but he made those comics, and people say, well, he created Deadpool, but he didn't really make Deadpool until Joe Kelly. And yes, everybody knows that, but it still is, he made Deadpool. Is it a ripoff of Deathstroke? Obviously, yes, but he still did it. It's still out there, and I think that's how he ends up trying to defend himself a lot of times. Is he's the one who did it. And it's one of those things where the people ripping on him, including me, for years and years. There's value to that. You not for me, not for everybody, but he makes those books. Sometimes, like the Brigade thing. I don't know if that's ever going to happen, but
the Kickstarter.
He did do stuff. Does he still do stuff? I don't know, but it's really interesting, and I think it's more that funhouse mirror. It's like, is there resentment? I could draw better than him, but do I? Did I ever put something together and show it to Marvel? No, I did not. And so, who is the better artist? One of between me and Liefeld, only one of us is an artist, because he's the guy who gets paid to do that stuff. But
it's you look at, say, X-Force versus Youngblood. I think if you look objectively at the characters, I think that as pure concepts, most of the Youngblood characters are the stronger ones. But Liefeld didn't get professional writers to help him to do Youngblood. And when I read Youngblood #1, and one of the stories just stops in the middle with a splash 2-page spread and no resolution, and the other story is just not that interesting with lesser characters, and then you go into the second issue and you get another unresolved, badly constructed story, I'm going to prefer the X-Force stuff where they got Fabian Nicieza to go in there and do a pass at it and make it make sense and make sure that there's characterization to go with the plotting. And do I think that most of those characters are that interesting? No. But are they better? Do they have more of a voice, and do they have a more interesting story to tell with the help of a professional writer? Yeah, they do. And that's why those characters are appearing in motion pictures and the Youngblood characters are not. But also, Joe Kelly is another guy where it's like, did he do a lot of comic book work? Yeah. Did some people like some stuff that he did? Sure. I know a lot of people will swear by something like I Kill Giants and stuff, but not huge sellers or anything. When would he have decided that he wanted to do a comic book involving the X-Men characters, starring a hybrid of Deathstroke and Spider-Man that leans into the humor but makes it darker? Would he have ever thought to do that on his own? No, he was part of a writing program where they let people come in and sort of intern at Marvel. They gave this kid a shot, just like they gave Ed McGuinness a shot. They had intellectual property that had been proven to have an audience. And so they gave it to these new guys who had a spin on that material that resonated with people. They wasn't about a huge seller when they did it, but because it influenced the direction of the character that gained traction over the years, they helped to create the Deadpool that we know today. And most of the material that we know comes from what they did, but they never would have done what they did if Liefeld hadn't created a character and showed the viability of that character and alluded to what they ultimately, ran with. The basis of the character are still there from the very first appearance. And I think some of that is also Fabian Nicieza, and I know there's been a lot of arguments about, well, how much credit does Rob Liefeld claim versus how much Fabian Nicieza deserves. Nicieza is a guy who's written a number of humor books and has shown a capacity to write that type of material. Liefeld has never written anything remotely funny. Check out Blood Wolf and tell me,
oh my God.
Yeah. So he wouldn't have Deadpool without Fabian Nicieza, but nobody else would have had Deadpool without Rob Liefeld and Fabian Nicieza.
Right.
And again, you got that alchemy of the character that people respond to came from all of those guys. Whoever created them, you don't get to Ryan Reynolds without going through these other dudes. And so give them all the credit. That's why the Marvel movies wisely will have a freaking, a wall, like a memorial to all the people upon whom these films were built, on their backs. Because, very few characters, like, again, you're talking about Matt Wagner. Yeah, Matt Wagner and Grindel, that's pretty much a single creative force that you can attribute the majority of the appeal of that character to. But also, Grindel ain't Deadpool, Right. And I know there are people who would weigh the literary, qualities of one versus the other and which one has more validity. And also, it doesn't hurt that one is still a creator-owned character and one is part of a corporate machine. But ultimately, the character that more people recognize and that has a fan base and that has maintained that for decades is Deadpool. Then maybe that'll change when they come out with the Grindel TV show, if it ever comes out. But I don't think so. I think that as much as I think there's interesting things that were done with Grindel and that it will resonate with a certain audience, I don't think it's ever going to be Deadpool. And I might like Grindel more than Deadpool, but everybody knows that my tastes are not the mainstream. They are not the majority. And an argument can certainly be made for just the sheer volume of material written about Deadpool for a character to maintain his vitality over the course of that. I mean, you look at Matt Wagner and Grindel, the Hunter Rose is not in that many stories, And then Christopher Barr isn't in that many stories. Grindel Prime isn't in that many stories. The concept may have traction, but none of the individual characters have demonstrated anything near to that. And then a character that he invested much more time in as an individual, the Kevin Matchstick, that's not even as popular as Grindel. So, there's something to be said for collaboration and for having a mechanism in place to expand a legend, to not just leave it to be the one thing you decided it can be, but to allow it to go through that prism where it becomes something different to a whole bunch of different people. I'm sure there are guys who like the Deadpool stories that are played completely straight. Yeah, there's not a lot of them, but I'm sure there are people who are really into that. It's like, those were the good Deadpool stories. These other ones where he's all goofy, I don't like those. But when he was really serious and really deadly, those are the good ones. I'm sure that guy's out there somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure he is. I think that kind of, like you said, like alchemy is the thing. I think comic book, and maybe even especially superhero comic book people, because they're always kind of building, and it's always like some kind of messed up Jenga where you're trying to take a piece out and put it on the top and elaborate and iterate. So I guess that Herc, what's his face from the Alien? I already forgot his name. Like Mondo. That's the kind of thing. Herc. I did it now. Herc Mondo. He's the guy who, like, you'd think he's ripe for that kind of reinterpretation, iteration, elaboration type of thing. But that's what maybe not.
Well, it's like you're talking about honoring the Dark Horse books at Marvel, and it's like, well, that's the obvious. Oh, you want to blow everybody's minds. You want to do something really cool and interesting. Actually, create continuity amongst all those series. Actually, pay off and resolve a bunch of this stuff that was left lying around. Nobody ever picked up any of those pieces that the previous people laid down and took it anywhere. Some of the concepts maybe, but not the individual characters, not some of the different scenarios that were laid out that were not exploited. And that's one of the things that's so great about comic books. There's always somebody in there, but especially like Bronze Age books, when you had the fans turn prose. And so to them, that stuff was canon, that stuff was scripture. And so they were constantly going back and looking at what old people did and resolving the continuity errors. And there was never a character that was allowed to stay in the waste bin for long, especially at Marvel. And so what you do, you take all this material that Dark Horse generated and you actually figure out, okay, well, this guy from this show and this guy from this book over here, you put them all together and you see how they play off each other and you have this reaction over here and stuff. That's the thing you do. You don't just try to say, okay, well, let me do my little variation on the basic alien formula. It's like, well, no, build upon that stuff. But that's one of the things where as human beings who have to live in this world, comic books have gotten better by having things like creator rights and royalties and stuff like that. But again, the corporate machine comes in there and says, well, wait, Joe Kelly's got a piece of faith. Well, I guess we're not going to use faith because we don't want to pay him a dime, for using this character. So this character just isn't going to get used anymore. And there's always going to be a prohibition. Hey, we bought the entire Ultraverse, but we've got problems with one of the guys who we would have to pay for rights to use in movies and stuff. So we're just not going to ever touch those characters again. And it doesn't matter if Steve Englehart never gets another royalty off of that or whatever. That's not our problem. It's not in our corporate interest to continue to use those characters when we have perfectly good characters that we own 100% and can just give a thank you card to on the back of the movie credits, Image, as much as I'm an Image booster, the problem is one of the things that supposedly was going to help save them was that the Image didn't own anything. It was the individual houses and there was no community pool. But the lack of community pool means you don't really have a shared universe there. And what you have is a bunch of disparate books with tenuous ties that can never really be elaborated upon. So if you don't like Eric Larson's Savage Dragon, well, guess what, buddy? You might as well give it up on that character because nobody's ever going to come in there and do a radical new, anatomy lesson version of Savage Dragon. He's always going to be the thing that Eric Larson decided he is. It takes a community to build a universe. It takes a community to have characters that have the kind of longevity that you see with Marvel and DC and the like. There is evil that comes with that. There is sin. There is, people who are going to get screwed over or not given the proper credit. But if your focus is on the mythology, if your focus is on the lore, you need to have that, different people coming in and out of that and contributing different things. And you have to have somebody mess up so that somebody else can figure out how to fix the mess up and come up with an interesting story out of that, I mean, right. We were talking about Adam Warlock. Adam Warlock doesn't exist if Jack Kirby and Stan Lee didn't have this throwaway concept that got picked up by Roy Thomas and turned into Jesus Christ Superstar. And then Jim Starlin says, oh, you know what I think about your Jesus Christ Superstar? He's the Antichrist. He's going to be the leader of the church that runs around and kills everybody and has crusades and does all the horrible stuff that they don't tell you about in seminary, It's great when you have a singular artistic vision, but usually that has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And it may have longevity or it may not, but it's a finite thing. And it's one of the things we've seen with the popularity of the Marvel Cinematic Universe is people love when these different concepts interact with each other and where they evolve and they want to see this expanding universe and they want to see all these things that are disparate come together and coalesce. And you can't do that if you're fiercely protective of your particular copyright on your particular set of characters. So, yeah. So as much as I want somebody like Image to be as successful and viable as Spider-Man is, for instance, they never can be because at the end of the day, it's going to be Todd McFarlane and his shitty collection of Spawn-alikes instead of having a cool super team where you've got all the best characters from all over the Image universe coming together, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's what you get. It's an exception to the rule, obviously, but like you sometimes get like a Usagi Yojimbo and the Ninja Turtles, but that was fleeting. You know what I mean? Like that happened, and it happened more than once, but it's not like the Turtles are in the new Usagi books still. You know what I mean? It's I thought Image was supposed to, like they did. It was probably years ago now already. They were supposed to be focusing on a new trying to refocus on the superhero universe. I think I got way behind. I only had read the first couple issues, but that crossover book, that Donny Cates was supposed to be superhero-y crossover stuff. Like I know it did have what's his face, Madman was in it.
Yeah, he was in that. Yeah,
but I don't know how much more crossover-y it got than Doctor Strange, but not really. You know, like a Doctor Strange analog is in there and stuff like that.
Yeah, I've got the first volumes. I think what it is, I read the first volume. I own the second one. I think I was waiting for them to solicit a third, because that's what I'll often do is like, oh, it's time to order a new one. Let me go ahead and read the one I've already got. On a good month, that happens, as opposed to me either giving up or continuing to buy something without knowing whether or not it's actually anything I want to continue to support. But my recollection is that like the Doctor Strange analog you mentioned, that was a pre-existing character, and if I recall correctly, it was a Little Red Dark Horse series that was creator owned, and they got to borrow those characters for that book. So it's not like they just came up with an analog, threw it into crossover. They were pre-existing characters. It's just that if you weren't reading that one little cult title, then like you said, you would just perceive that as being another Doctor Strange knockoff. And it only has so much mileage because, again, they are analogs. It'd be way more interesting if they had somebody that you did recognize in there. The fact that you can do a crossover with characters nobody cares about, that's only going to take you so far. That's like, Malibu's Genesis line, It's like, they had that other line, but unless you're like super into the Centaur characters and a revised version of the X-Mutants that didn't even have the characters from the X-Mutants books that Ron Lim drew, which is the only ones anybody cared about anyway, then what does it matter to you,
Right. It's like, yeah, it kind of reminds me of the that Comics Greatest World thing. Man, you're talking about those little omnibuses that the two times I biffed up and Diamond wouldn't let me fix it, and I ordered a trade like it was a one-shot. They were both those stupid little omnibuses. One was the Comics Greatest World omnibus, and I ended up having I thought it was a sampler one-shot or something, and I got like 10 of them. But 10 one-shots is not 10 freaking omnibuses. And then the other time I did it, it was Knights of the Old Republic. I ordered it like it was the issue, and it was and it was like volume 3 of that stupid tiny omnibus. And like, oh, you guys, can I return these? You gotta help me out here. And they're like, nope, too bad for you. Like, I mean, it should have happened more often. I don't know why I didn't screw that up more. But
see, yeah, and with my comic shops, we had pretty thin, razor thin profitability. So if I'd have made that mistake myself, I could have maybe closed the shop, So thankfully, I didn't. I did have a few boo boos, but usually it was dumb stuff. Like we were using faxes back then, and so somebody misread my handwriting, and we ended up with a copy of Stuck Rubber Baby instead of whatever I was trying to order. So I was like, hey buddy, I'll buy this from you at cost, and then we could just call it a mulligan and be done with it. And that's how I ended up with the hardcover on my shelf. It's a good book. I'm glad it worked out that way. But thankfully I didn't have any ones like that. I've occasionally gotten, since being a retailer, I've occasionally accidentally ended up with duplicates of volumes of a trade where it's like, what am I doing? What do I need with 2 copies of The Exterminators from Vertigo, for instance, of volume 2 or 3, whatever it was, I don't even have a volume 1 that I give away to introduce it to somebody. It's like a 2 or 3, and it's just like, well, it's just sitting on the shelf, reminding me of my boo-boo. But thankfully, I didn't kill any shops with any of those, and I didn't have any ones that were like 10, 20 copies of a trade paperback. That's a lot of dang money. So
it was gross.
I don't envy you that. It would have been really bad for me personally, and for people I worked for if that had happened. I'm really lucky and grateful and blessed that didn't happen to us.
Yeah, I had the Comics Greatest World one was brutal. I think we ended up I think we put them at the counter with a shelf talker for like $1, and nobody bought them. And then we ended up putting them in free comic book day bags, just like, please take this, away from me. So
we don't want to pay the
reminded.
Taxes on this thing, okay?
Yeah, it's a disaster.
And I do have that omnibus, but I got it for like $5 for less. I was never willing to pay full price, especially because the problem with those books is everybody had the dollar versions. So many people, or if they wanted them, you could easily get them for less than $1, and they were only $1 to begin with. So why do you need them in a trade paperback of diminished proportions,
Yeah, that's smaller, and they weren't, I didn't do a deep dive on them, but when they came out, I actually was like, oh man, Vignola did the cover to this Machine comic, and Paul Chadwick is doing something, and Frank Miller did this X thing, and Stephen Grant is writing it. How bad could it be? And it just didn't seem like it was.
No, it wasn't very good. I bought them all. Because I like price point. I like the concept. I wanted to support it. But the main problem was they kept telling me that people were going to get involved in a way that they were not. Jim O'Barr was supposed to draw one of the books. That didn't happen. I thought Frank Miller at one point was going to write one of the books. That didn't happen. There was a number of creators that were notable that were supposed to do volumes and didn't. And even with the ones I did like Paul Gulacy did the first Barbed Wire comic book, but he did it without using any zip tones, and he did it in a style that was sort of a lighter version. How Keith Giffen will sometimes draw in this sort of animated style where it's just not as detailed as his normal stuff.
I think it's the line weight is not variable.
Right.
Is what I know. It's almost like he's using a rapidograph or something that makes the line weight the same.
And so that's the way those Gulacy books, that one Gulacy book looked. And of course, he only drew that one issue and no others, even though they did an ongoing series and stuff. So it's I'm only going to get so much enjoyment out of a 16, not even a 16 page, because I think the entire book was 16 pages, and they had a page or two of connective tissue for that particular location and stuff. And then there was the origin sequence as well they had there that Lee Weeks was doing. So 12 pages of Gulacy artwork? There's only so much I can get out of that, especially because she had that awful pink costume when she first appeared before they started getting her in the black leather. So that was not great. But somebody like X looked so freaking cool. I loved that design, and Chris Warner was one of the better artists that worked on that stuff. So that first little taste was appealing and really cool, and then they proceeded to not ever do anything quite that good with the character again. I tried to read X a number of times, and it just they never could fully pay off the concept. So it just basically ended up being Punisher but punchy,
Right.
Yeah, such a drag. Or
they
Ghost.
Rebooted it lately. Not lately, probably 10 or 15 years ago.
Right.
But that was supposed to be more of a payoff on the original promise, but I didn't look at it.
I actually bought the trade paperback. I think it's called Catalyst Comics that Joe Casey wrote. And nothing escaped that little mini series that he did. So it's sort of like when Warren Ellis did New Universal, where it's okay, here's the 2 volumes. This is all you're going to get. But I've yet to get around to reading it. It's one of those things I definitely want to read someday, which is why I own it. But I haven't had anything compel me to do so as of yet. And I probably bought that trade a decade ago. Boy, time starts to fly the older you get, I swear. But there was some interest there. I wouldn't have paid cheapy prices for the omnibus. But I know I'll eventually read them, and I'll maybe see some spark of promise. But if it was anything really that good, people would be talking about it on podcasts, and they'd be, there'd be the revivals and stuff. It's if it was anything that great, there would be some sort of a cult around it, but there's not. There's really, I've never met a Dark Horse Comics Greatest World super fan. I've never seen the cosplay, maybe Ghost and Barbed Wire, but that's about it. So I don't think there's a lot there.
I think I've got Ghost and Barbed Wire. Did Adam Hughes do the cover to Ghost?
No, he did the actual interiors on that first Ghost part of the 4-issue miniseries. He did the Ghost chapter in full.
Oh, and did they have a Dave Dorman cover then? Is that who did those?
No,
covers?
I think he did everything. He did the cover and he did the interiors. It was just the little supplemental stuff that Lee Weeks did, but the rest of it was actually his interiors. Now the thing is, that's probably the only comic book that he produced that year.
Right.
But they got their 12 to 14 pages out of them at least.
Yeah, that's.
And then when the series came back, they had somebody like Matt Haley or somebody doing it. So somebody who was maybe not Adam Hughes, but good enough to where you could see that they were fulfilling the promise that was in that 1-shot or 4-shot, however you want to look at it. And obviously Ghost had the longest run of any of those characters. characters. So again, doing something right. But again, at most a cult character and not a particularly strong, devoted cult either.
Yeah. I can't remember many of the other ones. I think Jerry Ordway did Rebel. That's what that one was.
Just the cover on that one. I don't think he did the interiors. I want to say maybe Tim Hamilton or Bill Reinhold, which are bad people. They're not Jerry Ordway though.
Right.
Plus, that was not a great design. That was one of those guys that looks like he was generated for an RPG.
Yeah, like buy an RPG. Like you had to roll to get that. Like you roll. Oh, I got a 2. Now he has to wear goggles. No, now he's got to have a ponytail also. Dang it, ponytail and goggles. You know, all that stuff is. I can't remember the year, but that was like the end times, right?
Oh yeah, they were all the meteors hitting the Earth. They're 1993. Yeah. That's the year when everybody decided they were going to launch their brand new universes. And boy, I mean, it sold great. Those had really good sales. I think the price point helped them a lot. I think there was enthusiasm about a new universe coming out of Dark Horse, and Dark Horse had their fans that were probably looking for something like that. Just the other day, I was at Bedrock City, and they had a whole bunch of Triumph books, or Triumphant. I think it was Triumphant, and a bunch of Defiant books were in there as well.
Yeah,
and it's like, you know, there was a time when the market could support all that stuff, but it was very finite, and the debris is still lining chibi boxes. They were $1 a piece in some pretty nice little bags and boards. You know, they were in really great shape. I often see those books beat to hell at conventions, but it was rare to see them in that good of a condition. Yet for some reason, I didn't find myself needing to buy any of those Triumphant comics. You know, I just didn't quite make that. You know, I actually bought some continuity stuff because I'm still trying to cover some of that for one of the podcasts. Like, and I noticed that like the stuff you can find online, they're not really great about having all the chapters of like Death Watch 2000 and Rise of Magic. So it's like, hell with it, $1 a piece. I'm just going to go ahead and buy the thing just in case, whichever ones I happen to need.
One of your podcasts sent me on a down the rabbit hole on some of that continuity stuff, and I ended up putting a bunch of it in my not in my shopping cart, but on my wish list on the Nostalgia Zone site. And I'm like, I'm gonna put this on the list, and then I'm gonna go away for a couple weeks, and I'm gonna come to my friggin' senses, so I don't spend any money.
Yeah, I was about to say, what do I owe you? Did you take Venmo?
No, I didn't even buy.
No. I mean, if you love Neil Adams artwork and you're just gonna look at the pictures, you're set. You start reading that stuff, and it's just like when Chris Sims had that series on Batman the Odyssey or whatever, where it's how many different insane concepts can you throw at the wall and not resolve any of your storylines and not have any of your storylines make sense and be competing with Jim Ballant for inanity in the comics. They're mostly really, really bad, and most of the fun is in enjoying how bad they are for as low a price as you can get away with. You know, but I do have a weird devotion to Sam Marie, and I look forward to covering her on the next episode of that thing. And I really wanted the Revengers to be cool. I really wanted to enjoy those guys, and they pretty much suck. So it's, you know, it's just not really. I'm going in there like priming myself, wanting to enjoy this, and the actual material just completely thwarts that intent.
Yeah, that's a bummer. I mean, I think Earth 4 was the only thing of that I ever read.
Ooh, yeah.
And it was one of those like, you know, I've been around the block, and I see where this is coming from, at least. I don't know where it was supposed to be going necessarily, but I mean, it just, didn't land.
First draft theater. Everything about Earth 4 was first draft theater. It's like you knew they didn't think about it any further than creatively spelling the elements. You know, you got a team called Earth 4, and one of the members is named Earth, and he's not the leader. It's not, Gladys Knight and the Pips. It's just like, I'm Earth on the team called Earth. It's like, Granite? Rocky?
Literally anything else.
Terra? Come on, man. But they wouldn't even take that tiny little baby step towards validity. It's just like, it's like a child coming up with a concept and then starting to color it in with the crayons and figuring out what was going to happen from page to page. But you've got a middle-aged legend involved in the production of these things. And it's like, he hired writers, and it's like, well, what writers are you hiring? The guys that cannot get work anywhere else anymore. The guys that DC decided were too fogey-ish. And so you get the Elliot S. Maggins of the world. And then you don't pay Elliot S. Maggins bagging, or you can't produce enough material to keep him working. So you get one of the freaking interns to write most of your books.
Yeah.
What are you expecting, And it kills me so much because, again, it's the whole image thing. You're going to get the best letterer, the best colorist. I want it to be on the finest paper stock. Characters, okay designs. Sure, I'm not going to develop them any. They just have to punch and kick and swear. It'll be fine. You don't need to pay a writer. You're going to get an intern. You're going to get your high school buddy to write this. You're putting all this money into everything else. Trust me, you can get a guy who's a professional. He'll write proper dialogue for you. He'll follow your plots. He may not be great, but, get Marv Wolfman. He's got a writer's block anyway. He just tell him to write the dialogue. He can probably manage that. But no, that was too much to ask of them for most of the time. Although you'll note that Marv Wolfman did write some of that stuff, so probably that's exactly what was happening there.
Well, I think it was a comic buyer's guide, like what was it called? But I digressed, like Peter David's thing in there.
Sure.
I think he had a column about literally, if you've been through elementary school, you can write. And that's the problem is nobody was making the distinction between I can print words and form a sentence and I can write a story. Like I can professionally construct a story, because those guys would say, if they were doing a Marvel method and they were convinced that was all that they needed, that's how you show up and that's how you get, Bloodpool or whatever, second iteration of Image that was so gross. It's just
Bloodpool was the New Mutants of Youngblood. Good call.
Yeah, extra bad. That's another thing I had in my basket.
They were the Gamma Flight or whatever it is. They were the guys who were training to be the next generation of Youngblood. But that literally was a concept, You weren't just putting two things together humorously. It's like, nope, that was a book. They did that.
That was a legit. I forget the names of it. Was just talk about like not investing in the characters. Most of those, not most, a lot of those extreme characters were phoned in or half baked, and those were like quarter baked, maybe. I think the one character's name was Soul, like Korea, and she was Korean. Surprise! And I don't even know.
Well, or X Mutants is maybe a little too highfalutin. Let's come out with the New Men.
I actually I was over at the Source, not lately, probably 2 years ago, the way time works, but I found one of the, I think it's is it Eric Stevenson or Eric Shanhauer? Eric somebody wrote.
Yeah, Eric Shanhauer is the one who does the Oz adaptations, where Eric Stevenson is the current publisher of Image Comics and got to start writing a lot of those terrible Liefeld books, yeah.
Okay, that one. But Chris Sprouse did the art, is why I bought it, because I was trying to, I have a non-zero interest in this, and I'm going to look for it, and I looked for it, and I never found it, and then I'm like, I want to actually deliberately seek it out, and I found one, and it was $1, but it wasn't terrible, and it looked fantastic, so it was worth $1.
That was kind of Eric Stevenson's thing, is he wrote the Liefeld books that weren't terrible,
Yeah.
And he's done some stuff in recent years that wasn't too bad, but it's like the bar was pretty low, so he was like, I'm not offended by this comic book I'm reading, but I don't think there was a lot of like, the Eric Stevenson fan club is probably not heavily populated.
You could tell he was making an effort to, here is subtext, here is some foreshadowing, he was doing the comic book things that you'd expect a comic book to do. And it was nice because, the other, I don't know if it's not a strike file, is it? It's the first appearance of Dutch, whatever that one is.
That was probably Strike File, I think. Yeah. Because that was the one, the basically Avengers Spotlight, but with the Youngblood character.
I think so. Yeah. And it's
they just brought Dutch back.
Yeah. That's why I saw that they were doing that. And then I was like, where's Dutch's first appearance? And then I looked and that's in the dollar bin at the store. So I ran over there, got it. And it was a thing where the Nick Fury guy, like on page 1, he's bald and smoking a cigar. And then on page 2, he's got a full head of hair and drinking a cup of coffee or something like that. It's just like and in my head, I'm like, well, that's fine because they drew this first page in January and the second page in, August. And the first page was already sent away somewhere and they couldn't reference it. So that's the story I was telling myself in my head about why that's so god awful. But the actual book, not good. The New Men was a Watchmen compared to that.
Well, and that's one of those things too, is we all like to take our shots at Rob Liefeld. And I found myself in the weird position of defend him done many a times, even though I know he's done some sleazy stuff as well. Again, you mentioned that Brigade Kickstarter that never came through, for instance. That's pretty lame of him.
Yeah.
But it always struck me as so cool that he let Chap Yape keep the rights to Dutch, the hot new member of Team Youngblood, right?
Yeah,
and because
for
he
sure.
did that, then Dutch isn't caught up in that Andrew Rev stuff that swallowed up most of the rest of Youngblood. And now Dutch is back being written by Joe Casey in their 30th anniversary anthology, because he's not imprisoned by whatever deal Liefeld cut that cost him his babies, you know?
Right.
I love that he escaped. I love, just like Peter Cannon and Thunderbolt. I love that they couldn't DC couldn't take him and absorb him into the corporation because Pete Morrissey was able to prove that he still had copyright on that character, and that his estate is still out there doing stuff with that guy over at Dynamite and stuff. I love.
Did you read any of that Dynamite stuff? Did you read that Dynamite stuff?
I've bought it. I haven't read it. So it's one of those things where I kept wanting. I managed to score most, if not all, of the Charlton run for dirt cheap at a convention, and I started reading them, and I liked them okay. Really, I like Pete Morrissey as an artist more than I like him as a writer. And I'd actually wanted, at one point, I was wanting to do a video series where I was going to do maybe a little limited, not really limited animation, but just do the panels and show the panels and do little voices and stuff specifically for Peter Cannon Thunderbolt, just because it would be so niche. And because the one Charlton book I had as a kid that I had affection for was Thunderbolt. And of course that never happened. I never have time for stuff like that. And so I bought the Dynamite stuff. It's Kieran Gillen. It's probably going to be really cool. I'm sure it's going to be a little bit more Ozymandias than I really want. But it sounded, they put together an oversized hardcover of it. So somebody must really like it. And now they've got, what is it, Jeff Harker or Fred Van Lente or somebody? There's doing a new series run of it right now. It's supposed to be closer to the original comics. And so whenever they inevitably collect that, or if I catch a deal on the floppies, I'll end up checking that one out as well.
Yeah, I didn't know they were doing a second one. I have that oversized hardcover of I think it's called The Watch. And it's a very, the Kieran Gillen stuff. And it's pretty, I think it's known that it's almost like not like a diss, but it's like a retort maybe to Watchmen, the whole thing. And it's not as dense as Watchmen, and it's not as ornate or articulate as Watchmen, but I still think it was very entertaining.
That's piqued my interest some, because that miniseries, if I remember correctly, came out not too long after all the before Watchmen junk.
Yeah.
So I'm curious about that more so now. And I was always been curious, but I love a good diss track, like you said. So I was like, ooh.
Yeah.
I mean,
I think it was a diss track of that stuff, of the before Watchmen, or the return of Watchmen, or the whatever, the button, all that stuff. I think it does speak directly to that, even more so than to the Watchmen. So I read it more than once. I really like it.
I'm trying to reach a stopping point with the continuity stuff. I figure I need to do at least 2 more episodes just to kind of get through the core books before everything started crossing over with everything else constantly. But I'm already lining up in my mind stuff to follow up with, ideally of a smaller scale. And certainly Peter Cannon would be a candidate for that, even though, with all the DC stuff, it's a little weird to, because I'm trying to stick to independent characters. But yeah, to some degree, he is the ultimate a refugee, that he managed. You've got this whole little bitty universe of characters that got swallowed up by DC, and he's the one guy who managed to make it out alive. So there's something to that.
Oh, you gotta read it. It's, not, don't put it on top of a pile or anything, but it's pretty great. Did you ever read any of the Eddie Campbell autobiographical stuff?
Is that I think I bought it. I think it's one of the ones I got and put on the shelf. I've got Bacchus. I can't see the full shelf from here, but I might have.
It's pretty. It's not essential, but they kind of riff. They riff on these different genres, maybe, in that Peter Cannon Thunderbolt The Watch. It's very. I think you'd dig it. It's one of these things where I read it and I'm like, A, I like this. B, I probably count on my ears how many other people I know who would react to this like I am reacting to it. I don't know how you
to get the references basically to see what was actually being done there.
Yeah, and it's good, and I think it was successful.
I think so too. I think it's one of those deals where it's not like he's he's written for Dynamite very much, to my recollection. I want to say maybe he did one of the 007 arcs or something, but he hasn't dipped his toe into Dynamite too often, so I'm thinking maybe there was a reason why he went to them for that one little deal and then, head right back over to Marvel, so.
Well, I think it was it was an opportunity to kind of get that out of his system because he doesn't, he should just, I'll let you read it and then we can.
The one other problem too is, remember, the other obstacle is I have to get through that other Dynamite Peter Cannon thing that they did. The one where they had, I think, Alex Ross covers and randos on the interiors.
Oh, yeah. And it was was that part of their Superpowers world?
I think it tied into some degree, yeah.
Okay. That was a thing that it escaped me. Like I was in the store when it started coming out and I'm just like, it should be right in my wheelhouse, like all these old guys, the Del Dracula, for God's sake. I mean, that's the kind of stuff I'm so overexposed to comic book superheroes. That's the kind of stuff where I'm like, yes, this grotesque old thing. But so I should have been loving that, but I didn't even read it.
Yeah, I'm in the exact same place as you. On one of the comic reader resumes, I talked about how I'd gotten this one, weird Scholastic magazine where they had an article about the Golden Age heroes, and it was one of my first exposures to, non-DC, non-Marvel type of stuff. Like, because you look at the old Jules Pfeiffer books, and they kind of conflate Plastic Man and Captain Marvel with Superman and Batman at a time before DC owned them all, right? Or that it was common knowledge that DC owned them all. But they were still at a certain level of accessibility, and certainly they'd all been on TV shows and cartoons and stuff. So there was a familiarity there. But then I read this article in this magazine where it's like the super obscure guys, again, like the Flame, and I think maybe Mighty Samson was in the mix on that, although that's not Golden Age, so probably not. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. Hydro Man was in there, I think. A lot of the guys, the Centaur guys and Fox Features guys, and they talked about it, and they mentioned some of the weird, dark stuff that happened in them, and they just seemed so peculiar to me and so fascinating to me. And that dark streak, that Depression era mentality that went into their creation was like, this isn't as safe as Plastic Man. This is going to be something more edgy and interesting. And I have read some of that stuff in the years since. In particular, the stuff that Lou Fine did was like, wow, this is as good as anything anybody else is putting out in terms of the art. So when they announced that universe of public domain Golden Age characters with a 3 or 4 panel Alex Ross painting, I thought that was going to be like my new favorite thing. And it only took a few issues of reading that before I realized, oh, good God, I forgot that Alex Ross should not write. One of the great painters. And I go back and forth because sometimes I just get really bored with this stuff, and then sometimes I'm into it. Sometimes it depends on the subject matter, but also I think that sometimes he just has a fresher angle, where other times it's like the same old stuff over and over again. Let's do the same shot. Let's keep it ominous and let's keep it ominous and treat the heroes like they're deities and all this kind of stuff that he's always wanting to do. But him painting all those characters, like, wow, this is going to be awesome. And then you read it, it's like the premise is so stupid and so easy to pick apart. Why would I want to read a line of books about characters that got sucker punched by one loser superhero and not a single one of them managed to figure it out and free the other heroes or anything else? And it's just this one numbnut, trapping them all in an urn one by one. I don't respect any of these characters. These are morons, and why would you want to? To me, the worst thing you can do with a bunch of Golden Age characters is decide, okay, well, the period where they weren't getting published, they were in limbo, and now they're coming back exactly as they were 40, 50, 60, whatever the current point is years ago, to face a world that was unknown to them. It's like you've got an entire line of Captain Americas, and and I love Captain America, but if you've read Captain America comics, that's as much Captain America as you need in the world. Captain America really pushes the edge of jumping the shark with all the longing for the good old days nonsense, and it works for him, but you can't multiply that by 50. There's only so many different ways you can react to a world not your own, and like they were all doing that. And of course, they also were having to do it during the Bush administration. So all of a sudden, it's all about the Iraq War and the Patriot Act. And it's like, I can see that working on a smaller scale, like something like the 12 that Straczynski did. But you're talking about dozens upon dozens of characters you're trying to do this stuff with and try to fit them into a certain, political spectrum, mostly a duality, and it's like there's just so much sameness here, and there's so much agenda here, and there's just so much lack of real depth, a variety, and there's so many more interesting things you could do. It's like, well, what were these guys doing when the Marvel heroes were doing this and the DC heroes were doing that? Well, what were these guys in the 50s? Because you don't have to have an excuse like, well, we were all just waiting for Superman to show up and we were just twiddling our thumbs until then. The Senate shut us down and we just didn't do anything for decades, and we let the Blackhawks save everybody instead. That's the kind of thing that falls apart real quick, especially when you've got a protracted timeline where all of a sudden it's 40, 50, 60 years of them, knitting,
Right.
So you go in there and you're like, okay, where were these people during the McCarthy era? Where were these guys during the Vietnam War? And you can almost do Watchmen, but maybe not so cynical, maybe like, okay, well, this is the bad stuff and the good stuff, and maybe have a more nuanced view instead of, Alan Moore had his lefty politics, so he's showing how awful the fascist superhero premise is and stuff. Well, you could maybe do something different than that, but you could do something similar, but come up with a different perspective if you're an actual writer, or you can shove everybody into an urn and spit them back out again yesterday and go from there. And they're all still dressed up like schmucks from, the silent generation and stuff. It's like they're all dressed like circus strongmen again, or worse yet, they're being refined. Now they're symbol clothes because that's what we do here in the early aughts, It was just so completely bankrupt of creativity. And it's always that for a person who's always persecuting the Chromium era comics, to have that same edgelord grimdark mentality for every stinking project, it's just so tedious, It's like, that's why I've never, I was really impressed with Alex Ross in the transition from Marvel to Kingdom Come. I bought the books when they were coming out. I bought the limited edition hardcover. I bought the stupid overlong trading cards you had to buy special 6 pockets for. Again, schmuck now.
Jeez.
And I still have those. I sold the hardcover, and now at this point, Kingdom Come is one of those books to where it's like referencing it, I judge you. It's like, if you're like, I think James Gunn just tweeted an image from Kingdom Come, and it's like, bitch, you better not.
No, you can't. And that's the same thing as putting
John's
Dark Knight
too. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my God.
It's
you gotta have the book before you can go off the book. That's why you can't have Frank Miller's Dark Knight in the first appearance of Batman in that new. I didn't see it, so I don't know. I don't feel like you can have the stupid Frank Miller old Batman fighting Superman when he first appears, right? Because in that,
basically,
what's the point of that?
Basically, and it's one of those things that the bit where the semi truck gets caught in the tunnel and nobody can figure out what to do, and a child walks up and says, "Why don't you let the air out of the tires?" That's one of those deals where it's like anybody could tell you why it's a bad idea to try to launch a shared cinematic universe with the Batman at the end of his career and Superman at the beginning of his career. And I know that there was the whole thing where they're going to do the Nightmare and probably fix a horrific post-apocalyptic future and blah blah blah. It still doesn't change the fact that you've introduced Batman in his 50s and you've got Superman running around at the beginning of his career, and you're trying to move a universe forward out of that. And then when you find out what the actual plan was, this whole Lancelot Guinevere thing where Batman was going to end up putting a baby in Lois Lane, it's like these things don't fit. And you shouldn't, like, your whole thing is you are slavishly devoted to adaptations of stuff that's already been written. Quit trying to write, because that's not the thing you do. You can do the cool visuals. You don't need to be writing. And you especially don't need to be taking from folklore and shoving it into a thing that's already a modern American mythology. It's already been done, dude. We don't need you to do that. All that kind of stuff, we already did it for you. Just adapt that. But anybody could tell you that was a bad idea, and they went along and let him do it anyway. Somebody should have said no. Especially because, again, Zack Snyder is a guy who, financially speaking, has not been a very successful director, Like, most of his movies have not made a lot of money, and they cost a lot of money. Why would you give the universe over to somebody like that without a proven track record? And why would you make an entire universe so specific to one perspective? Where, with Marvel, there's a sameness to it, but it's not like the entire universe is dominated by Iron Man. There's a whole bunch of other people there doing a whole bunch of different things, and part of the fun is the conflict between them. But anyway, that's a whole tangent. Point being, Kingdom Come is the cautionary tale. Dark Knight Returns is a cautionary tale. You can tell that story. You can even launch a universe with that story, but then you have to go, but this isn't where we progress from. This is the thing we're trying to avoid. But that doesn't work if you've already set Batman up to be a guy who's going to die in the next few years, or a guy who's not going to be able to continue to function in the next few years because you've got a 50-some-odd-year-old actor playing him and playing him to his current age,
Yeah.
If you want to just pretend that Ben Affleck is 28, okay, fine. But if you're actually going to pay him as a 50-something-year-old, this is the beginning of the universe, guys. This isn't rocket science. Make them younger.
Yeah.
And especially don't have an old and a young when you want them to develop parallel to one another over a long period of time. It's just basic stuff.
It's gross. I mean, they better not. I mean, they can do whatever they want, but the Kingdom Come thing, if that was like anywhere near the horizon, like that could be their end game, and then trying to not get that, like they could have Kingdom Come and then this is how we're going to undo it or keep it from happening or whatever. But the thing I really don't get is, especially with DC, is like, you've got the authority. You don't even have to, if you want to make Superman snap somebody's neck, you can make him snap necks for a whole movie. It's Apollo. You know what I mean? It's not Superman.
Or Mr. Majestic. You got to spare.
Yeah. Mr. Majestic. If you want to make some guy like, who's space god, whose powers are out of whack, some kind of space Jesus, there you go. He's there. Mr. Majestic. You can make a Batman who uses a gun. His name is Midnighter. It's just sitting there.
Yeah. But see, that's the problem though, is Apollo doesn't have a trademark. Apollo doesn't have a registered copyright next to his name, and he doesn't have t-shirts out there. He doesn't have an iconography that you can smash and be the cool kid because you're the iconoclast. You're going to give us the cool dark twist on the Man of Steel, That's been DC's problem ever since Marvel, because in the the 50s and 60s, they were at the top of the world and they thought they were untouchable and they thought they had everything right and they didn't progress with the times and they got outflanked by Marvel and they've held themselves in contempt ever since. You've got the crown jewels. You've got the biggest superheroes, the most recognizable superheroes, and you hate them and you're constantly trying to figure out what's wrong with an IP that survived the better part of a century. For these concepts to survive constant attempts to deconstruct them and misconstrue the intentions of their creators so flagrantly, and yet there's still something inherent in them. There's still an appeal that you cannot destroy. And also, of course, one of the great success stories was Wonder Woman, and that's by playing her pretty close to how she's expected to be portrayed, by actually playing up the heroism and playing her as something that contrasts against Superman and Batman by not being awful and hateful and contemptuous of the very concept of heroism. So do more of that. And they did. They had Aquaman, and Aquaman was also incredibly successful. So it's like, okay, how about Superman then? If you can make Aquaman work, surely you can make Superman work. Haven't proved it yet, but it helps if you don't walk into it with the assumption that, like Joel Silver, why's he gotta look so gay? Why can't he just wear all black instead of the red and blue? And it's like, wow, that was a terrible idea. It's a good thing we didn't do that. Hey, Zack Snyder, how about you do the black and silver Superman and have that be him finally realizing his ultimate self in the black and silver? And let's put him on a team where he's sitting next to a guy who wears a black and gray outfit. It's like, they're two different guys. If they're the same guy, then what's the point? Sorry.
Yeah. I think it was not very long after the New 52, because I took a hard turn. It was actually talking about, coming in the back door, gatekeepers and stuff. The reason I got into DC was because of Sandman. And then
Morpheus.
Yeah. And then it's Morpheus. And then I started to go, oh my gosh, look how this fits to all these other things. And then I started to get into the Golden Age guys, because Wesley Dodds was on the JSA,
and you mentioned Matt Wagner, so probably that didn't hurt.
Yeah, that was a big part of it. But then I started to get into Starman, and that was where it really hit the gas. And in hindsight, like, I would hate this now, and so I try not to be too critical of when it happens. But like that issue, I bought Starman. I think it was Starman 8, and I only bought it because James Robinson was going to be at Motor City, and when they announced the guest list, I tried to pick up something for everybody so I would have an excuse to go up there. And I bought it, like, oh man, this is actually great. So I went and I got the back issues, and I went more in love with the DC Golden Age characters, and the thing I liked about him, and I think he even said this in an interview, was, you can have, or maybe it was on like the AOL message boards even. It was something, anyway, someone asked him, how come you have Starman and Black Canary having an affair? Like, isn't that corrupting the integrity of these characters? characters. Why would you do that type of thing? And he said, because you can't have Superman and Wonder Woman have an affair.
Mm-hmm.
That's gross. But you can do that with Starman and Black Canary. It's okay. And, and then he went back and had his in-continuity reasons and his real world reasons, including they were published in the same book or whatever. But I ended up, even though I came into it through Vertigo, basically, and then the Golden Age miniseries and then Starman, that's the kind of stuff where, like, I saw they're launching a new JSA and the roster is Power Girl, Icicle, the Mist's grandson, Jack Knight's son, all the, a new, I don't remember, like a Red Bee or something ridiculous. I'm like, these characters are all going to get shot or exploded in the first issue. I guarantee it. Mm-hmm. And of course, that's what happens. They all get killed. Like, why? What is this? Like, why everything have to be this kind of like, oh, there's a serial killer and isn't he edgy, or, oh, isn't it so bleak? Like the only Superman book probably of the past 20 years that I've been able to read and then go back to is All-Star Superman, because I tried to read the New 52 Superman and I couldn't figure it out, I don't think, which made me feel bad because I like Grant Morrison and I liked the concept, but I just couldn't make it work. And it feels like all that DC stuff, the thing I had to tell myself is the way I understand those characters is obviously not the way the people who own them understand them, and they're not mine, so let them. So Superman murders people, that's good, let them, because I don't have to give them money for that. I can just step back. I still have my Superman poster up, but I just can't. It seems completely inaccessible, all of DC, really. It just makes me sad. Stupid JSA.
Well, and then again, I was in the same boat with New 52, as I was really excited about it at first. I'm not really excited about it. I was somewhat excited about it. Excited about the possibilities. But two things dawned on me. One was that what I loved most about DC and what got me into them in the 90s was the continuity. It was the history. It was the fact that they were these guys around going back to the 1940s and even really before then. And you got all these legacies, these generations of legacies. And I wanted to see that elaborated upon. I wanted to see it deepened. I wanted to see them decide, okay, well, guess what? Metamorpho was back in the 60s and the Sea Devils were back in the 50s. And those were the guys from those time periods, and we're not going to keep trying to bring these guys back and sell them to the audience in the 90s, the 2000s, what have you. I want to see them just set those guys as period characters and tell period stories with them, and that way we can continue to do our stuff with Superman and Batman and not feel like they're missing out or anything. But instead they do the opposite of that, where they eradicate all their history, where they don't even have anything from the 1940s anymore, and everything's going to be brand new. And even then I was kind of into it because, like, okay, cool. I liked Wildstorm. I think there's a lot of cool Wildstorm concepts. It would have been way better if they'd been bought by Marvel, since so many of the concepts were knockoffs of DC characters like, I don't know, Mr. Majestic and Zealot and, the Coda and all that kind of stuff. Apollo and Midnighter make way more sense at Marvel, except Marvel's going through a bankruptcy, so they don't have the money to buy another comic book universe, and there's no guarantee they wouldn't have ultraversed them. So great, it's over at DC. So cool. So you again, these are characters who have established ties to the 50s and 60s and so forth. So if you want to fill in your universe that way, you can still do that. But you can also contrast these new, darker characters against, your modern characters. You can essentially do what's so funny about Truth, Justice, and the American Way with the actual authority instead of just knockoffs of them, for instance. But also, I love the idea of, okay, you're going to integrate them into the DC universe, and they're going to have an influence, and we're going to see that play out. And they just barely play with that a little bit, and they completely abandon it. So what's the point? And the point is everybody's going to have a new costume and a new jumping on point, and they're not going to do much else with it. With Superman, I thought it was really cool when they had him fight Hellspawn. Hellspawn was in cartoons, Wildcats cartoons in the 90s. This is a guy who had action figures. This is somebody who was doing stuff parallel to what DC was doing in that same time period. So he brings something to the table. There are still people who were alive and reading comic books. They would have been a fan of his appearances who were now eventually going to read Superman comics. But they only try that for a few months. Somebody gets mad or somebody decides it's not working. And then that character just doesn't appear ever again until they do more Wildstorm stuff, where he's doing the same kind of stuff that character did, in the 90s. So it's just a regurgitation where you could have had some like cool new remix. Well, how does Superman's cosmology with Krypton and everything else respond to the Daemonites and stuff? And it's like, no, it doesn't matter because we're never going to progress past a couple of appearances. We're going to allude to some stuff. We're never going to pay it off. We're going to drop this entirely. And then also, I think I seriously, I've never had this confirmed, but clearly there are some Wildstorm properties that come come back over and over again. And there are others that are like they never existed. Like for some reason, we never see Wetworks again. Why? Somebody has to have participation. Somebody has to be making money off of that. And so you don't get to use those characters. Where you look at the Authority, those were work made for hire properties created by Warren Ellis and Company for the corporation that was Wildstorm. And therefore DC owns that entirely now. They can do whatever the hell they want to with it. Same goes for Alan Moore and his Tomorrow Stories, the America's Best Comics characters.
Oh, God.
If they want to do stuff with them, they own them lock, stock, and barrel because Alan Moore is a terrible businessman. He might be brilliant at other stuff, awful at business, and so he doesn't own those characters, and so Tom Strong's going to be in some Fantastic Four knockoff or whatever, you know? But these other properties, you're never going to see again. You're never going to see them exploited again because I'm assuming Brandon Choi or somebody else has a piece of them. Wolf Portasio has a piece of this. And so there's stuff that comes back and stuff that just doesn't. So, but you had a universe that already existed and it already had properties that it needed to perpetuate itself. And you're not translating that with the other characters and you just keep half-ass regurgitating the material that you were doing in the late 90s and early 2000s without ever advancing that story beyond that point. Like how many times can you go back to the Authority and tell a watered-down variation of something that Warren Ellis or Mark Miller did? You know, how many times are you going to do that? And how much impact does it have? And are they even relevant anymore? You know, do we need these characters anymore if there's nothing left to say with them? If you've neutered them so completely that they don't have any impact anymore. So, I mean, what's the point? But since you mentioned, and that's what we needed with Project Superpowers, you needed a James Robinson instead of an Alex Ross. You know, get Alex Ross to paint the covers and let James Robinson do the actual writing, although I know he got tired of being the Golden Age guy after a while. But since you like that stuff, you are reading Black Hammer, right?
I've got, someone gifted me the first Gargantuan omnibus, and then I picked up a couple of the one-shots just kind of here and there, like the ones I knew weren't like the self-contained ones. And it's fantastic, and I really like that stuff. I mean, it seemed at the up front anyway that it was like a Justice League type of pastiche maybe, but I did love it.
Well, I mean, it's literally like the James Robinson stuff. It's like Jeff Lemire is just like, okay, I'm just going to do what James Robinson was doing. I mean, you literally have a miniseries about Starman, you know?
Yeah.
It's like this is the thing that I like. Another one. Did you read Jupiter's Circle?
Is that the Mark Miller thing?
Yeah.
I didn't because Mark Miller gives me the hives.
Given, but if you read Jupiter's Circle, which is not the story that's taking place in modern times with Frank Whiteley artwork, it's Wilfredo Torres doing period material about the same kind of stuff that James Robinson was doing. So if you dug that, then read Jupiter's Circle and don't worry about the other Jupiter stuff, you know?
All right.
So there are still people doing that type of material. You just got to kind of root around to find it. But anybody who tells me they love that James Robinson material from the 90s, it's like, well, if you're not reading Black Hammer, at the least you're just doing yourself a disservice because that universe still exists somewhere. It's just ain't a DC.
Yeah, and it almost, I mean, the only reason I was reading it because it's not DC. You know, I mean, like I think I can't even remember. I had a bunch of rules in my head that like we had to cross these thresholds before I give money to DC again, and I think I cleared all the hurdles. One of them was Dan DiDio had to not be there. One of them was something like because when my daughter was like 5, I think is when a lot of this like post New 52 grimdark nightmare stuff was happening. Like I want to just buy her a Wonder Woman comic. Where can I buy one? And I ended up going to the back issue bins and just buying the most beat up, cheapest Wonder Woman just so she could have a Wonder Woman comic and see it, and I had all the other, probably ridiculous criteria, but I just never really went. I think the last thing I did buy the Sandman Overture, and I did buy Thunderworld.
Oh yeah, I picked that one up too. I mean, it's easy when it's basically a one shot. So
yeah, and I thought that was cool, but they didn't make a Thunderworld series. They made more messed up, weird Shazam, whatever. So
yeah, and it's so funny because I like James Robinson, Jeff Johns as a writer pre New 52, and it really feels like he got Roy Thomas, where he spent all these years developing something that they blew to pieces. And he just never, like Roy Thomas, he's never fully recovered from that. It seems like now he's doing his little young all-stars,
Yeah, actually, that is what that seems like. That's pretty funny. I mean, it's sad, but it's pretty funny.
We laugh instead of crying, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't know. I mean, I would way rather, even the way the new comics are priced, I'd much rather read a 20-year-old Aliens comic than the new, I don't even know if they're publishing Justice League right now. I don't think they are because of Dark Graces.
I want to say they've got something like, I mean,
they've got like one shots of like because they're all supposed to be dead, right? And then they're really in their little funny worlds. So it's like the little secret worlds.
I guess maybe they don't actually have a monthly right now until they relaunch inevitably in like March. So.
Yeah, I just can't. All those guys. And what normally, I don't know. I mean, what's the name of the guy? Williamson writing the new Crisis?
Yeah.
He's got to be, somewhere in between you and me in age, because he's, to bring back the Great Darkness from Swamp Thing as the thing. You're like, what are you doing there? And I don't know what's more outrageous is that he did that or that I didn't care. You know what I mean? Like, oh, they're doing that. Let them go. I think
Joshua Williamson I've really enjoyed him as a writer. In particular, I liked his work on Birthright for Image, and he apparently had a really well regarded run on The Flash. But for whatever reason, just Dark Crisis is not connecting with audiences, and it's not one of those deals like Heroes in Crisis where Tom King has just gone overboard with the psychobabble and the continuity cruelty. It's just sort of like Williamson is working on stuff that nobody cares about, for a story that nobody cares about, for what appears to be yet another quasi reboot of a universe that's been rebooted so many times that nobody can get it up for it anymore. So I don't think it's his fault. I think that there's some credit to be given to him just for not making people mad, but not making people mad isn't very interesting either.
Right. That's true. Being inoffensive is not. I mean, I guess I don't want to be offensive. Like a lot of that DC stuff. Yeah. The thing you're talking about with the generations, and in the 90s, I came in through the Vertigo, but where I ended up was my favorite book and DC hero that was, an ongoing series was The Flash, and it was Wally West, and then talk about, continuity cruelty. Jeez Louise. I don't know. I read that Vision series Tom King did, and I enjoyed it a lot. I'm like, this guy's good. And then the next thing I know, he's putting Watchmen and Batman. And you're like, why? Why would you do that? Like, what? And then he does Heroes in Crisis, which I didn't buy, but I was at the point where I was still obsessively following, I wasn't buying the books, but I was still like, what happened in this new Crisis? And all that stuff with Wally West, just like that was when I stopped buying it with Multiversity, and then I stopped even reading about it online after the Heroes in Crisis, because good Lord, what's the point?
And a lot of that was Dan Didio, and that's why I agree with you. I couldn't come back. There are people that defend him because he was doing what he had to do to keep the company relevant, keep people working. He loves the characters. You got to break the toys to keep things interesting, blah, blah, blah. And it's just like they kept doing stuff with characters that I cared about over and over again. And it's like, well, this is obviously coming from somebody. So if Didio's got a grudge against Nightwing, then he's going to be threatened with death, dismemberment, radical alterations again and again and again, because Didio keeps telling people to try some different way of screwing with this character. We're going to constantly rape and murder members of Justice League International for some reason, which continues to this day with the stupid Tom King Human Target series, It's like you've got these attitudes that have to come from somewhere up top that just continue on through the DC universe and ripple across it and just alienate me repeatedly. It's like, how many times am I supposed to be turned off, given something distasteful, and expect to go back and have another nibble,
Right, yeah. It's too much. Did you ever read the Peter Milligan Human Target?
I skimmed it a little bit, but I never properly read it. I was doing that little project with Siskoid's podcast, the Who's Editing, and I kind of skimmed some of that for material, but I didn't sit down with it.
It was pretty cool when it was coming out. It was the first thing it was the first thing I read where it explicitly referenced 9/11 and not in like a
Dr. Doom crying kind of way.
Yeah, not in like a Doom crying or like one of these fetishized. Even though I was just looking at one of those the other day, I was trying to figure out if I should put it in the to sell pile, and I started to flum through it. I'm like, oh, this is actually not disgusting propaganda like I thought it was. But it was he's impersonating all these different people. He's taking their place, and he starts to get kind of messed up about
identity, it.
Yeah. But at the end of the first issue, the cliffhanger was he's rambling and he says something to the effect of, I remember that day perfectly. Everybody remember is then you turn the page and it's a splash page of the Twin Towers, and he goes, "It was the day that I died," and then it's like the towers collapsing, and you're like, "Holy crap!" That was all that seemed pretty good, and the graphic novel was good. All that stuff was good. I think that he did a late '90s. I think it was Living in Atlanta. They had Tim Bradstreet covers. The first Vertigo book he did with Human Target, and then they were all pretty good. He did the guys who were on Catwoman after Darwin Cook were on Human Target. Can't remember who they are though. I'd have to look it up. But it was good, and it was very innovative visual storytelling. And Peter Milligan is not always a slam dunk, but he's pretty good. He's written some really great stuff. He's his Shade the Changing Man. That was another one of these things where I started buying this Vertigo book and I thought it was fantastic, and then I this is a Steve Ditko character. It's like crawling through the back issue bins, and I every time I saw anything with Shade in it, I would buy it, including Suicide Squad, which it was hard to reconcile. I was always looking for the real, is there an in-story reason for why these guys are so different? But it didn't really matter. But yeah, he's great. And that Tom King, that's what he said, I found out he was writing the Human Target. I was like, oh no. Oh no.
That and the Justice League International were going to be like his supporting characters in the series. Those are two things that go together.
Yeah, they're all dead is what and then that's where that's going to end. Or they're all going to be mutilated or turned inside out or kill themselves.
And it's a Black Label book, so it's not even in continuity anyway. So it's like whatever, some characters he's a concept breaker, and some characters can be benefited from that and others just not. And Justice League International fandom has been through enough already. Leave them alone. Don't kick them while they've been decades down and their concept is never coming back because of how thoroughly the earth has been salted on that material. And just the simple fact that to this day there aren't a lot of actual good comedy writers in comic books. I knew pretty early on that the look of that book and the creative team, I could have definitely seen myself picking up a copy of that once it was done. And then they did what they did, and I will definitely never read that. They completely soured me on the idea of fooling with that at all. So sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I don't know. I didn't hear a lot about that Adam Strange miniseries. Some people said good, some not. But he's got the things he does well that people really like, and then he's got a lot of stuff where he's just again, he's Wally Westing these people. Where that's another guy who'd already been through so much, and his fandom had already been through the ringer, and it had all these false promises of how they were going to fix things, like the Flash Rebirth and stuff. And then it's like, no, we don't need a Flash after all. We're going to mess with this guy some more. And now it's like, oh no, we're going to bring back and bring him even more children. It's like, I don't think that's making it better.
That's not helping. Wanted him to come back. But the Tom King, what he did in the Vision series, he did do that, like I'm the Breaker, but it was all stuff that he built first. You know what I mean? And so it was almost like it didn't feel like he wasn't messing with Adam Strange. And you could make the argument, that I had to swallow with Adam Warlock. He's like, well, where's the Adam Warlock comic that you like? Is that coming? And I was like, yeah, no. And so maybe Adam Strange is the same kind of thing. Maybe there's not the great untold Adam Strange, and maybe this is all you're going to get out of it. But still, it just seems like it's reductive. Is that right? I think that's right. Just, you're not bringing anything to the table. You're just taking away. And I felt super bad. I was like, but I kind of like Tom King. Maybe this Supergirl thing is going to be different, because he keeps talking in all these interviews before it came out about how it's different and how it's going to be great, and it's going to be the spirit of Supergirl. And I would like to have a Supergirl comic in the house for my kid to see. But the bad part about not being on Twitter is all those names are going away. Dr. Ange, is he the guy who likes Supergirl so much?
Yeah, and did not enjoy that book at all.
Yeah, I was reading his blog about it, and I was like, oh man, I'm not going to give them my money. And maybe I just won't give them my money anymore, period. Maybe I'll just find stuff in the back issue bins or the whatever half-price books. I'll peel the quarter stickers off of them, and then that'll be where I get my DC stuff from.
Yeah, well, it's just like me, I had my Martian Manhunter blog all those years, and people are always like, oh, you got to check out this Martian Manhunter series. What are they going to do? They're going to relaunch it from scratch again. They're going to reveal that what we thought we knew about him was a lie again. They're going to take concepts from earlier books and just give lip service to them by applying the names to a totally different character that's got nothing to do with the original concept, and I'm supposed to be wowed by the legacy or the attention to detail of borrowing a name only and not actually following through on the concept at all. And also the fact that these are always long series, 8+ issues, and they never resonate. They never have any lasting impact. They might as well have never existed. But this one though, this was the good one. You ought to try this one over here. And it's like, no, I probably shouldn't, because they're probably doing things that are going to just make me mad or disappoint me. And I've been disappointed enough after all these years. But call me in. Like fairly recently, they did that arc in Action Comics where they brought back all these old Silver Age concepts, and at first I was like, oh, that's really cool, until they failed to do anything remotely interesting with them. And then I realized by burning through them all in rapid succession in like a 6-page strip, that all they're really doing is rendering all these characters useless, because none of them can put up the slightest fight against the guy they're supposed to be going up against, and they're not being twisted in a way that's interesting. It's basically just like a very mild update, but they still come off as a bunch of putzes who can't are ineffective and are kind of corny. And it's like, okay, so you're just letting me know that you don't actually care about these characters. You're not going to do anything substantial with them, but I'm supposed to get giddy because, hey, look, that person turned up for a couple panels. No, okay, if you're not going to do anything with him, don't. Just leave it alone. Right. At least leave me with the idea that somebody someday might do something cool with these guys. Just, trying to give me some little element of nostalgia to sell me on an undercooked story. That's, great. Martian Manhunter's got a Hush now. Martian Manhunter's got a Who is Wonder Woman now. Hurrah. That's not
right.
Whatever.
Does he really have a Hush? Is that?
Yeah, he's got his little baby Hush. There was a backup strip in Action Comics where it's like him going up against all the people that he fought back in the 1960s and whooping them in a few panels apiece, all to set up a new version of Vulture and Faceless, who was also pretty swiftly defeated. So it's like, okay, well, you're basically telling me that his entire established Rogues Galleon is a bunch of chumps. So cool. Okay, great. Yeah, you're not even going to let Human Flame fire jets out of his nipples anymore? Well, what's the fun in that?
Between the Pages blog, Canoes, Charlton Hero, Chris Dunford, Chris Lydon, Dear Watchers, a Comics Omniverse podcast, Ed Moore, Gregory Litchfield, The Hammer Strikes, Random Geeky Stuff, Huckhoff, Iowa's Joe Is, It's Plastic Man, Jeffrey Brown They Them, King Dinosaur, Mike at Send Aliens to Me, Randy Caldwell, Resurrections, Warlock Thanos Podcast, Scott X.
I will take a Pepsi Max while you're over there. Hey, give me a Pepsi Max. You're right there, dude. You're gonna have to pay for that Coke with some labor. It ain't terribly laborious.